The bells began their climb up the noon hour, metal voices rolling across London like a tide. Cameras rose in a forest of hands. Children squealed. Tour guides lifted little flags that trembled in the sun. It looked like a postcard, until one look shattered it. Don't move. Don't speak. The man's voice was velvet on top and wire underneath. His thumb dug into the small shoulder beneath his palm, the gesture disguised as a protective hold. She's shy around strangers, he added, smiling for anyone who might be looking. Aren't you, Sophie? The little girl didn't answer. Her eyes did. They found Staff Sergeant Adrian Whitlock through the glare, two blue signals cutting through sunlight and ceremony. For a beat, the guard in the scarlet tunic seemed carved from the same stone as the palace. Then a memory unclenched in the back of his mind, a training scenario drilled into every protector who had ever learned to read what words could not carry. The silent hand signal. A closed fist. An open palm. A press to the opposite hand. Every trained guardian knows to fear it because it means one thing: help me. What did it mean here, in front of the royal standard, beneath centuries of etiquette and ever-ready cameras? And what would happen when a Queen's Guard, when Whitlock, broke the one commandment his uniform was built upon: do not move? Before the world would find out, the courtyard performed its usual pageant. The sun polished the bearskin caps to a lustrous black. The line of guards held their 1,000-yard stares. Somewhere behind the crowd, an ice cream van chimed a nursery tune that was almost comical under the circumstances. Whitlock stood absolutely still, but nothing in him was still. He felt heat seeping down his spine under the heavy wool, the familiar ache in his arches. He also felt a prickle that had saved him more than once, the intuition that turns ceremony into surveillance, that makes a crowd a map. Other guards cultivated a glassy, unseeing gaze. Whitlock had never been able to do that. He had learned, in a place of dust and blown-out windows, to watch the edges. Years ago, on a road flanked by mud walls and poppies, he'd noticed a boy who refused to kick a football into a certain patch of shade. That refusal saved his patrol. You could miss a bomb if you stared at the road. You could miss a kidnapping if you admired the palace. He scanned, as he always did, and the crowd arranged itself into patterns. Families clustered in sunflower rings of body language, protective, loose, distracted. Singles moved like arrows. Couples leaned inward. There were smiles, groans, a few eyes glistening as the band took a corner too beautifully. And then, an absence of all that. The girl was about 8. In a river of shorts and sundresses, she wore long sleeves. Her hair was brushed to museum neatness, the kind of careful that looked like someone else's hands. While other children tugged and pointed and bounced, she made herself smaller. When the man adjusted his grip, she flinched, but only in the places he couldn't see. Stand up straight, he hissed from the corner of his smile. Remember what I told you. No talking. Her chin dipped. When the man checked his phone, her shoulders unlocked a fraction, the kind of micro-relief Whitlock had seen in hostages who knew a routine. The sergeant remembered his own daughters, Sophie and Amelia, shrinking into him during their first fireworks, then peeling away once the bangs became music. Fear that lifts like mist. This girl's fear didn't lift. It condensed. Is it your first time? A tourist asked kindly, the sort of London question that means nothing and everything. The man answered for her. She's shy. From Manchester. My niece. He squeezed her shoulder with an affectionate performative pat that almost disguised the warning underneath. Almost. Whitlock watched their spacing. The man kept the girl at a leash of 2 feet, drawing her in only to reposition, as though playing her through choreography. When a family with a laughing toddler drifted by, the girl's face tilted toward the sound like a flower toward sun, then snapped back down as the man's fingers found a pressure point under fabric. Another tourist, a woman with grandmotherly softness, smiled. Sophie, love, would you like a sweet? There it was again, that micro-hesitation on the name, a tiny lag as if the syllables were a code to remember, not a life lived. Whitlock clocked it, filed it, let it ping the same wall of instincts that the long sleeves had hit. The ceremony moved like clockwork, and the clockwork was beautiful. Boots cracked against stone. The brass sang. Protocol laced the air tight as the stitches in Whitlock's cuffs. He should have been another page in a centuries-long book. Instead, he was counting things, the man's watchful triangles to the exits, the way he positioned the girl just outside the palace camera's obvious cones, the habit of answering for her, the bruising that bloomed when fabric slipped, finger marks, spaced like confession. A whisper drifted in, Too soft for a camera but not for a soldier. 1 more hour, the man murmured down at the crown of her head. Then we are leaving. And if you've been good, maybe I won't punish you tonight. A chill rinsed the heat right out of Whitlock's skin. He kept his eyes on the horizon line, as he had been trained, and looked at everything that mattered without seeming to. The girl's hands flexed. Teeth settled into lower lip. She weighed something, a math he recognized from people who were deciding between a pain they knew and a danger they could not calculate. Down the barrier, an elderly couple watched with the alertness of people who have taught classrooms and raised their own children through storms. The woman edged closer, gear-shifting from tourist to teacher. "Lovely day," she said. "First time seeing the guards." "My niece is shy," the man said, the vowels posh enough to steam. "We are in a hurry." "I taught primary for 40 years, the woman said gently, as if to no one at all. "Shy children are often the most observant." Her husband nodded. "And the most honest, when it matters." Their placement was tactical kindness, a social buffer between predator and prey. A young mother paused. "That backpack," she said, eyes narrowing playfully. "My daughter has the same one from the Manchester School District. Funny, the name tag looks turned in. Shouldn't it say Sophie?" The grip on the girl's shoulder tightened by a grain you wouldn't clock if you were here for selfies. "We need to go," the man said brightly. "To a bus." "But the ceremony," the elderly man began. "Change of plans." The smile fell off the man's face the moment he turned away from witnesses. He steered the girl toward the exit, a shepherd's crook made of fingers. The crowd flowed, oblivious in that way crowds can be. The band hit a triumphant phrase. A drone hummed somewhere in the blue. Whitlock's view blinked behind a tour group poster for a split second. When the sign dipped, he caught the girl looking back, eyes threaded with "Don't let me disappear." A bell strike rolled across the stones like a verdict. Whitlock didn't move. Not yet. But the stillness in him had acquired a purpose. Something was about to break. They walked the perimeter of the crowd the way a wolf skirts a flock, too casual to alarm, too deliberate to ignore. The man's voice shifted from silk to sand as the spectators thinned. "Remember what I said about running. They won't believe you. No one's looking anymore." The girl's face smoothed into that terrible mask children learn when they must make adults feel safe to survive them. Careful stillness. Eyes down. She didn't disobey. She managed him, minute by minute, breath by breath. When a jostle from a tourist knocked her sideways, the man yanked her back so sharply the cuff licked up. Purple-yellow prints, a week old at least, ringed her wrist like a sick bracelet. He noticed Whitlock's gaze and dragged the sleeve down, smile reassembled. The guard calculated distances, from the exit to the street, from his post to them, from the nearest palace security to the first CCTV blind spot. He traced them the way he used to trace fields of fire. More signals stacked, the man's subtle angling away from camera poles, the glances that skimmed uniformed staff while feigning tourist indifference, the fixated scans of egress. Whitlock had sat through counter-trafficking refresher training 2 months ago. This man was reading from the wrong side of that manual. The girl's behavior read like a case study, hypervigilance without initiative, flinch responses calibrated to invisible triggers, a compliance born of exhaustion rather than consent. Not strict parenting. Sustained trauma. Across the barrier, the elderly couple closed ranks a little, the way good people do when their bones tell them something is wrong even if they can't articulate it. The woman offered a sweet again. The hesitation on Sophie hung in the air like a note that didn't belong in a chord. The young mother spoke up once more about the reverse name tag. That small, bureaucratic detail rang louder in Whitlock than the brass band. "To a bus," the man repeated, pulling. The girl's trainers scraped. She looked back only once, and that was enough. The message was there, the same one in every hostage glance Whitlock had ever honored. "Please." He felt the old pre-combat tension wake up in his muscles, precision without adrenaline. Ceremony and duty bound his boots to the flagstones. For now. They cut toward the main gate. The air there was looser, the current of pedestrians stronger with the promise of streets, taxes, anonymity. The polished iron bars wore the city in their reflection. Double-deckers, black cabs, bright shirts, an endless noon. "Walk properly," the man snapped under his breath as the girl stumbled. "You're making a scene." A tour placard and a cluster of elbows briefly obscured Whitlock's line of sight. His breath slowed to a metronome, each inhale a count, each exhale an assessment. When the bodies shifted, The pair were within 20 paces of the exit. 10. The city yawned open in front of them. "Excuse me," the elderly man called with perfect, practiced clumsiness. He lifted something into the air, nothing more than a dropped brochure, a pretext as old as decency. Your niece dropped. The man turned by reflex. That single heartbeat, lightly spent, was enough. Across the forecourt, the girl lifted her right hand. At a glance, it could have been a nervous itch, a sweep of hair, the fig leaf of shyness. But the movement kept going, precise in a way that made the world snap to silence for Whitlock. Fist. Open palm. Pressed to the opposite hand. The universal silent signal taught in safety assemblies and community PSAs. A child's mute flare. The sound of the courtyard seemed to duck itself, as if everything, music, chatter, the city, had leaned away to make room for the choice he had already made. The man saw it too. Rage warped his expensive smile. He crushed the girl's wrist in a grip strong enough to tear a cry from her. "You little." Whitlock's mind ran 2 tracks at once, the map of consequences, discipline, file marks, precedent, and the map of the only thing that mattered, distance, lines of sight, likely escalation. One version of him wore a bearskin and a myth. Another wore dust and sweat and a sergeant's voice. Under both was the simplest version, the father. The footfalls that broke protocol were crisp enough to startle birds from the eaves. Gasps flagged up like white handkerchiefs from the crowd. Phones snapped toward him, lenses drinking in the sin of motion. The other guards held formation, eyes dead ahead, their peripheral vision pulled thin and bright as wire. Palace security. Whitlock's voice cut clean. "Stop right there." People make choices in wedges of time thin enough to shave with. The man hesitated, the tiny, fatal slice that separates predators from planners. Whitlock used it, closing the distance in strides measured to intercept momentum, not just bodies. "Release the child immediately," Whitlock ordered, stance angled to sever the line between man and exit. "This is outrageous," the man said, his accent respun to silk. "My niece and I have a schedule." "Release her. Now." The girl froze, the safer strategy she'd used for weeks. But her eyes tracked Whitlock's, matching his center of gravity. He put himself between them and the gate, not quite blocking, not quite not. Enough to make the world smaller in the right places. "This is none of your business," the man hissed, the private voice again. "Do you know who I am?" "I know what you are," Whitlock replied, and addressed the girl directly, lowering his tone as if talking over tea. "Young lady, would you like to step over here while I speak with your uncle?" The gambit was deliberate. A child might not be able to say he's hurting me, but she could exercise a choice. He watched the conflict on her face, conditioning telling her that movement equals pain, hope arguing otherwise. "She's not going anywhere with us," the man snapped, catching himself. "Return to your post before I report you." Palace security materialized out of the crowd, plainclothes first, then uniforms. A discreet radio had clearly done its work. The circle of observers tightened, not a mob but a wall made of witnesses. Whitlock raised his voice so it would carry to the cameras and the conscience of the place. "Sir, I observed the international distress signal from this child. Protocol requires me to ensure her safety." "His behavior has concerned us for half an hour," the elderly man called. "The child is frightened." "And she didn't respond to the name Sophie naturally," added the young mother. "And that's school tag." The actor's veneer on the man's face cracked along fault lines. He scanned for gaps, for weak wrists, for soft targets. Found none. "Last chance," Whitlock said, a quiet thing sharp enough to cut. "Release her arm, or I'll remove your hand myself." The man turned to the crowd, outrage refitted. "Sophie, tell this man who I am." The girl lowered her gaze, a practiced survival. She didn't answer. Not to that name. Whitlock saw the hesitation for what it was, sanity fighting through fear. The balance had shifted. For the first time since the bells began, it was not the man's scene. "Young lady," Whitlock said, easing down to the girl's level without crowding, his body a shield that didn't feel like one. "The signal you made, we teach children to use it when they need help. Is that why you did it?" She was brushing her hair, the man snapped. "This is ridiculous." "I'll need ID," Whitlock said to him, without looking away from the girl. "And proof of your relation." Palace security stepped in, one officer front, one flank, one angle on the crowd. "Sergeant," What's the situation? Suspected child endangerment, Whitlock answered, professional now that the crisis had traction. Child used universal distress signal. Observable signs of abuse. The man produced a wallet with fleet fingers. Gregory Ashford, British citizen. My niece Sophie is visiting from Manchester. Sister in hospital. Temporary guardianship. The officer took the ID. Whitlock saw the tremor across the girl's shoulders the way a sailor feels a change in wind. Her eyes flicked to the man with every question posed to her. Sweetheart, a female officer said softly, can you tell me your full name? The girl checked with the man. Sophie. Ashford, she said carefully, like someone spelling from a blackboard. How old are you? 8. What's your mum's name? The officer asked gently. Aunt, my mom is. Her name is Elizabeth, Ashford cut in smoothly. This is upsetting her. The elderly woman cleared her throat with the authority of 40 years of classrooms. Earlier, she didn't react to the name Sophie until he said it first. And her backpack, the young mother said, pointing. The name tag is turned inward. Whitlock reached for the pink bag. Ashford moved to intercept, and security absorbed him without ceremony. The tag flipped over with a rubbery snap. Childish block letters peered up, earnest and devastating. Clara Morgan, Year 3, Oakwood Primary. That's not her bag, Ashford said too quickly. She must have. Clara. Whitlock said, low and plain. Recognition, terror, hope, 3 lightning strikes across a small face. It's okay, he said. He can't hurt you here. Are you Clara Morgan from Oakwood Primary? Tears overflowed in a rush like a dam had been breached. Yes, she whispered. He took me from school. He said my parents were dead. That no one wanted me anymore. The world snapped into angles and procedures. Security restrained Ashford, whose face turned cold as a coin. Phones rose higher. A tourist's gasp split into words. I've seen her, missing 3 weeks, Manchester News. Screens lit up around the circle with the proof of it. Gregory Ashford, if that's your name, Whitlock said, fury harnessed. You're under arrest for kidnapping and child endangerment. And I suspect worse. The handcuffs clicked. The crowd didn't cheer. They held their breath, waiting for the part of the story that always tries to escape. It didn't wait long. Stillness arrived like the pause between thunder and its echo. A medic somewhere called for space. An officer said police are 3 minutes out, as if time had teeth. You've got nothing, Ashford said, voice cooled into something clinical. The girl is confused. Traumatized. You're about to look very foolish. The female officer kept Clara tucked behind her, shoulders squared, stance telegraphing come through me first. Whitlock watched Ashford's weight shift, not his words. Knees soften, shoulder load left, chin set, someone who had fought before and hadn't lost often. The explosion of violence was almost elegant in its efficiency. Ashford snapped his elbow back into a male officer's solar plexus, a strike rehearsed enough to find the exact breath. As the officer folded, Ashford's forehead drove into the bridge of his nose with a crunch that made nearby stomachs flip. In the same fluid beat, his hand conjured a blade from somewhere in the architecture of his jacket, a slim, bright thing that looked more surgical than street. He didn't go for an exit. He went for Clara. If I can't have her, he hissed, no one will. Whitlock was already moving. Drills ran like muscle memory in his limbs. Outside line to the knife arm, redirect the arc along its natural path, break the wrist or break the intent. He caught Ashford's forearm, rotated with it, and drove his right fist into the sternum. Short, brutal, a percussion that stole wind and choice. The blade sliced a prayer line across Whitlock's forearm on the recoil. The red that bloomed through scarlet looked theatrically perfect and hurt in a clean, distant way that his body shelved for later. Get the girl away, he barked. The female officer obeyed, hauling Clara backward into a human barricade of guards who had abandoned ceremony for consequence. Ashford pivoted. Good, too good. He cut in slashing arcs meant not to land but to herd, to make space, to keep Whitlock busy while his eyes tracked a route around the wall of bodies. The crowd scattered in ripples, screams bright against stone. Whitlock stepped in, not back. Distance is a knife's ally. Closeness turns its music into static. He jammed the attacking hand with his forearm, felt the bite, and spun his hips for a counter that cracked across Ashford's jaw. The sound drew a collective flinch from the onlookers. "You're dead," Ashford said through red teeth, rage, and something colder leaking through. "You have no idea who I work with. They'll find you. Your family." It was the wrong target to name. A door opened in Whitlock that had no ceremony, no protocol. He saw Sophie at the piano, Amelia drawing chalk suns on the pavement, saw Clara's eyes when she said no one wanted me, saw, in one flash frame of future, a little girl taken into a van because a guard stayed still. He didn't rage. He focused. The next exchanges were not civilized. Whitlock attacked the hand, not the blade. He smashed his knuckles into the cartilage of Ashford's nose, drove the heel of his palm into the throat, a controlled threat that collapsed air without collapsing life, stepped through with a temple strike that shut the lights off without throwing the breaker. The knife skidded away, clinking its way to the edge of the crowd where someone in white trainers kicked it farther. Whitlock pinned Ashford, knees, and weight and practice leverage, the way instructors teach you to hold a man who wants to turn back into a weapon. He heard himself making contact, bone on bone, meat on stone, the horrible mechanics of stopping someone who would kill a child to keep a secret. Enough, Sergeant Whitlock. Enough. 4 hands, then 6, pulled him back into the world where things had names again. "He's down," a colleague said, voice steady and close. "It's over, Adrian." Ashford's face was a ruin that would live. The knife was a memory 3 meters away. Whitlock's knuckles leaked and sang. He looked at Clara. She was shaking, and she was alive. "Get a medic," Whitlock rasped. "Make sure he lives to face justice." The circle widened to admit uniforms and medics and the slick professional calm of people who come after chaos. The palace band had fallen silent. The city remembered to breathe. Sirens braided into the soundscape as blue lights washed over stone. Medics worked with the unhurried urgency of practice, threading a stretcher under Ashford, cuffing him even as they checked his airway. Camera lenses morphed from tourist toys into documentation. The palace forecourt, which had been a stage, became a crime scene. "Sergeant, you need attention," a staffer said, eyes on Whitlock's bleeding forearm. "The girl first," Whitlock said, already walking toward Clara, who was folded into the female officer as if she'd learned to be small as a survival tactic and didn't yet know how to unlearn it. "Is he dead?" she whispered. "No," Whitlock said, kneeling enough to de-escalate, not enough to alarm. "He's hurt. He'll face justice." "You're bleeding," Clara said, pointing at his arm with a child's paradoxical calm. "Just a scratch," Whitlock lied with a half-smile. "How long has he had you, Clara?" 3 weeks, she said, and the words seemed to pull weight from her ribs. "He took me from school. He said my parents had an accident. Then he said they were dead. That nobody wanted me." A woman in a suit approached, eyes both kind and knife-sharp. "Clara, I'm Detective Eleanor Hughes. You're safe now. We've contacted your parents. They're flying down from Manchester." "They're alive?" Clara asked, hope cracking through the careful numbness. "Very much," Hughes said. "They've been looking for you every minute." The tears that came weren't fears tied overflow. They were release, big and messy. A paramedic crouched to Clara's height. "Sweetheart, we need to take a quick look at those arms." "Will you stay?" Clara asked Whitlock, the request so small it almost missed his ears. "I'll stay until your parents arrive," he said, and meant it like a vow. While the paramedic took photos and notes in hushed tones, Hughes pulled Whitlock aside. "We have his mobile," she said. "Preliminary look suggests this wasn't his first. Images of other children. Communications offshore. This will go wide." Whitlock's jaw worked once. The rage from moments ago was gone. What lived in him now was something thinner and hotter, resolve. "Will she recover?" he asked, nodding toward Clara, who braced automatically each time a stranger's hand neared her. "Children are resilient," Hughes said, "with love and time, and with the knowledge that when she asked for help, someone listened." In under an hour, the ceremonial ground had been repurposed. Numbered markers stippled the stones. Officers worked their canvas routes. Statements began. Whitlock sat outside the medical unit, arm-dressed, voice careful, demonstrating the hand signal for the camera. "That's what made you break formation?" Hughes asked. "That, layered with the rest," he said. "Bruising. The name hesitation. His scanning of exits. The way he used his body to block cameras." Hughes nodded as if cataloguing not just the details but the kind of mind that had seen them while the city looked at pageantry. Across the way, Major Edmund Clark had arrived, a gravity in his step that meant policy was about to talk to reality. He conferred with palace security, eyes occasionally tracking to Whitlock with the unreadable expression of a commander whose soldier has done something unforgivable for the right reason. "They'll review your actions," Hugh said, reading the glance. "Breaking formation is unprecedented." "I understand," Whitlock said. "I'd make the same choice again." Hughes believed him, and in believing, she filed away something useful for later, the part of the report that says we were lucky he was there. Commotion swelled near the checkpoint in a register different from panic. This was urgency laced with love. A woman broke into a run the second her ID cleared, sobbing the way lungs sob after weeks of holding breath. A man kept pace, his face a map of sleeplessness and prayer. "Clara's parents," Hughes said quietly. "They came by helicopter." Whitlock stepped back as the officers shepherded the Morgans through. Clara saw them and became kinetic. Sound, motion, life, launching herself from the exam table in a streak of energy that only children can produce after famine. "Mummy! Daddy!" Mrs. Morgan folded to her knees so hard it should have hurt. Mr. Morgan bent over both of them, hands shaking as if he'd been plugging himself into a socket called dread and had finally been unplugged. "We never stopped looking," Mrs. Morgan kept saying into Clara's hair. "Not for one moment." Hughes gave them a minute, then two, then found the seam between relief and the next necessary thing. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," she said, voice warm. "I'm Detective Eleanor Hughes. We'll take Clara to hospital for check soon. Before that, there's someone you should meet." She indicated Whitlock. Mr. Morgan extended his hand and then, clumsily, both hands, as if one wasn't enough. "They told us," he said, voice fracturing, "that a Queen's Guard broke protocol for our daughter. There aren't words." "Your daughter saved herself," Whitlock said. "She used her training. She was brave." Mrs. Morgan nodded through tears. "You risked your career for a child you didn't know. How can we ever?" "No thanks necessary," Whitlock said. "I have daughters, too." As medics prepared the transfer to hospital, Clara peeled herself from her mother long enough to sprint back to Whitlock. She rapped him with a fierceness that startled him, small arms locking like a harness. "Thank you for believing me," she said into his tunic. "Always," he said, and believed that word in a way that rearranged his understanding of duty. The next morning, Major Clark's office smelled faintly of polish and paper. Photographs of other men in other redcoats watched from the walls. The story had already escaped into the world, clips on every channel, captions under headlines, a mythology brewing. "Sergeant Whitlock," Clark said, ritual washing the air. "At ease." Whitlock relaxed by regulation. Clark studied him the way good commanders do, taking the measure of the soldier and the man. "You know why you're here," Clark said. "Yes, sir. To address my breach of protocol." "In 362 years of regimental service," Clark said, "no guardsman has abandoned his post during ceremonial parade." Whitlock absorbed that number like a sentence. "The protocol exists for reasons that predate us," he said. "Discipline is the point. Break it, and you break the story we tell the public about who we are." Clark's mouth shaped into something not quite a smile. "There is, as you note, no protocol for this. For a distress signal. For a kidnapped child. For a hero with a bayonet you can't see." He looked out the window at the palace that had watched generations pass beneath it. The palace received 15,000 messages overnight. Every major outlet has the footage. The regiment's social media grew by 2 million followers while I was asleep. He turned back, the weight of everything practical draped over his shoulders. Whitlock waited. The line between relief and reprimand is razor-thin in rooms like this. "Your actions created a complicated situation," Clark said. "Procedurally, the breach is clear. Discipline insists on consequence." He lifted a folder. "Recommendations from the palace, the Metropolitan Police, Regimental Command." "Sir." "The unanimous recommendation. Note the breach to avoid precedent. No disciplinary action. In fact, the palace requests your return to ceremonial duties as soon as medically cleared." Clark's eyes warmed. Tourists are asking to see the hero guard. Whitlock blinked at the word hero, as if it were in a language he didn't quite speak. "A formal letter of caution will be placed in your file," Clark said, alongside a commendation for extraordinary judgment in an unprecedented situation. He extended his hand, rank to rank becoming person to person. The regiment is proud of you, Sergeant. Sometimes our duty to humanity must supersede our most sacred traditions. Whitlock shook the hand, old relief running new through him. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Clark said, managerial tone restored out of habit. Compassionate leave approved. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan have asked if you would attend a family gathering this weekend. They'd like your daughters to meet theirs. Whitlock's composure cracked just enough to show the commitment underneath. I'd be honored. Dismissed, Sergeant, Clark said. And well done. 3 days later, Manchester sky was a soft grey bowl and the Morgans' garden smelled like cut grass and something baking. Sophie and Amelia ran with Clara through a spray of hose water. 3 little comets leaving squeals for tails. Grown-ups sat, because sitting is what you do when your body doesn't know how to handle relief standing up. She's sleeping through the night already, Sarah Morgan said, joining Whitlock at a bench. The therapist calls it remarkable. I call it a miracle with footnotes. There's work ahead. But she's... Sarah's voice failed and then found itself. She's coming back to us. Whitlock watched the way Clara's head moved now, up, 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 catching birds, planes, her mother's face, without flinching. The bruises were fading from her arms. The older marks, the ones fretworked into her routines, would take longer. Children are stronger than we think, he said. Especially when the adults around them choose to be. David Morgan came from the kitchen with 3 glasses, the domestic sacrament. The police called, he said. Gregory Ashford isn't Gregory Ashford. He's wanted in 3 countries. They have enough on his devices to, he exhaled. Clara won't have to testify. They sat in the kind of quiet that honors what almost happened. Then David's face changed shape, grief and gratitude wrestling. They found messages, he said. He was planning to take Clara out of the country that evening. If you hadn't, he stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing. Everyone could read it. Whitlock watched his girls weave crowns of daisies with Clara on the lawn. He let the image fix itself like a photo he would carry in his mind when the world got loud again. How did you know? Sarah asked later, when the children were orbiting the swing set and the adults had settled into the kind of talk that weaves scar tissue. So many people were there. How did you see what the rest of us missed? Whitlock looked at his daughters. Sophie was teaching Clara a nonsense handshake. Amelia was wearing a daisy chain that made her look like she'd been crowned by summer. Training, he said first, because that is true. Recognizing the signal. Pattern reading. Knowing what control looks like when it wears politeness like a coat. He swallowed. Mostly, I saw her through a father's eyes. Once you do that, you can't unsee. On the grass, Clara placed a daisy crown on Amelia's head and then laughed when it slid to one ear. She glanced up and caught Whitlock watching the moment the sound surprised her. Her own laugh, returned after exile. She smiled, tentative then real. Later, when the sky went lavender, Clara approached, shy-busy, clutching a folded paper with coloring pencil smudges around the edges. I made this for you, she said, voice small but intact. Mummy helped me with the words. Whitlock crouched. The card showed a guard in a bearskin hat drawn with stubborn lines and fierce hearts. The letters inside were a child's brave attempt at squareness. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Something happened in Whitlock's throat that made words unreliable. He read it twice to buy time. You were never invisible, Clara, he said when sound came back. Not to the people who know how to look. He glanced at his girls, then back at the girl who would weave daisies and someday exams and someday something vast out of a life she almost didn't get to keep. Promise me something. What? Remember how brave you were. The signal you made didn't just save you. It alerted us to him. It will be taught because of you, told because of you. Other children will be helped because you spoke the loudest way a child can when words are dangerous. Clara nodded, solemn as a knight. We learned it at school, she said. The teacher said if we are scared and can't talk, we can do this. I didn't think it would. I didn't think anyone. Your teachers are heroes too, Whitlock said. Bravery isn't not being afraid. It's doing the right thing while you are. She hugged him with a ferocity he recognized from the forecourt, the energy of the saved. Over her shoulder he met Sarah and David's eyes. There is a grammar to gratitude that only phrases like we owe you our child can write. They didn't say it. They didn't have to. On the drive home, London unfolded like muscle memory. The girls, sunned and sugared, melted into the backseat, half a dozen daisy crowns fraying on the floor mats. "Daddy," Sophie said, watching streetlights turn into comets, "did you really break the rules to save that girl?" Whitlock considered it as if it were a question of parade drill. "There are rules that guide us," he said, "and duties that define us. Sometimes we are asked which matters more. Sometimes we are told, by a child's hand, which one is the rule." "I think you chose right," Amelia pronounced, 8-year-old judge and jury. "So do I, love," Whitlock said, and saw the traffic signal turn green like a benediction. "So do I." The story would echo wider in the days that followed. The footage would be spliced into news packages and stitched into social media. Schools would share the hand signal again. Parents would sit at kitchen tables and teach their children silently how to ask for help. Somewhere, another little hand would close and open and press, and someone would be watching because a guard once moved when he wasn't supposed to. What would you do if you saw a child in danger? Would you recognize the silent signal Clara used? The difference between tragedy and rescue is often one person paying attention while others look away. Staff Sergeant Adrian Whitlock risked his career because he understood that some duties transcend uniform and protocol. The uniform tells a story. The person inside it must decide how the story ends. If this story moved you, like and subscribe for more Royal Guard stories that matter. Tap the bell so you never miss an episode. Share this with someone who should know the children's distress signal. It could save a life. Check out the videos on your screen now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, another story, another reminder that sometimes the rules that keep us safe are the ones we break for the right reason.